Good afternoon, dear subscribers of my YouTube channel. Today I have both good and bad news for you. We will discuss the decision made today by the Bank of Canada regarding the interest rate. Also, at the end of this video, I would like to discuss a very important yet also complicated topic. Given the current situation, what is the most advantageous option today? Should you choose a variable rate or the so-called variable rate, or should you go for a fixed rate? Let's discuss this important and complicated topic without any further delay. Let's start with the good news. The Bank of Canada has lowered the interest rate by 0.25%. But unfortunately, this good news is tied to a bad situation in our country. Our economic situation is in a very dire state. Every time we're close to reaching our goal, and it seems like we've come to an agreement with the Americans that we're about to have, let's say, a signed trade agreement, our Canadian politicians make one mistake after another. And surely you've already heard about this, that our government in Ontario decided to run an ad in America where Ronald Reagan speaks out against tariffs, against taxing other countries. Can you imagine if Donald Trump is sitting in front of the TV and this ad comes on saying that the policy he's pursuing is not only wrong but also disadvantageous not just for other countries but for America itself? You could really expect the reaction that he actually gave. He simply announced on his Truth Social channel that he would no longer talk to Canadians and is breaking off any negotiations related to tariffs. The Liberal government is trying in every possible way to ensure that we find new partners. We will, let's say, cooperate more economically. And Corny is traveling all over the world. He travels to Asia, goes to Europe, and tries to make deals. But one thing must not be forgotten. Americans have been and will remain our most important partners. Stephen Harper in his time signed so many agreements with Europe and with other countries. And what do you think? Our economic cooperation with America has not decreased. On the contrary, it has actually grown. And even if our Liberal government somehow manages to double our economic movement and cooperation with Europe and other countries, it won't change anything. At the moment, 75% of our cooperation is with just one country, and that's America. If we manage to double cooperation with the countries that our Liberal government and Corny are now trying to double, it will only reduce the share from 75% to 70%. There will be no real change. It is very important for us not to waste time, but to negotiate with the Americans. We must not forget that even if these agreements come into force, it will take a lot of time. It could take 5, 6, 7, 8, even 10 years. We don't have that kind of time. Every time I open X in the morning and look at the news about Canada, it's only negative news. A company shuts down there, another company is moving, relocating all its equipment and production from Canada to the US because the conditions in America are very favorable. Trump is making it so that all companies are interested in moving their production from other countries, specifically to America. That's why it's important for us not to waste time. If we don't want to end up in a terrible situation, if we don't want our unemployment to skyrocket, we urgently need to make deals with the Americans. Otherwise, our economy will simply collapse. Now, let's talk a little about interest rates. The Bank of Canada has lowered the interest rate by 0.25%. Today, the Bank of Canada's interest rate is 2.25%. This is the lower end of the so-called neutral interest rates. Here, the neutral rate is considered to be between 2.25 and 2.75. Right now, we've reached the very lowest level. What does this mean? If the Bank of Canada continues to lower the interest rate, it will no longer be just a standard move. Something will be off. And most likely it will be connected to our economy. If the interest rate keeps dropping and we expect it to go down further, then of course it means that our economic situation is getting worse and worse. I'd like to make a couple of notes regarding interest rates because there are a lot of misunderstandings here. The rate that is now at 2.25 is the so-called overnight rate, the Bank of Canada overnight rate. This is the rate that banks receive from the Bank of Canada. But when they lend it to us, of course, they need to make a profit on it. That's why banks have what's called the prime rate. It used to be 4.7, now it will be 4.45. And that's the rate from which the floating interest rate, the variable rate, starts. And banks give a discount on this rate. For example, prime minus 0.7. So you know exactly if the prime is now 4.45, you subtract 0.7 and you know what your rate will be. When it comes to fixed rates, that's where we constantly have an issue. Every time the Bank of Canada lowers the rate, clients call us and ask, so what happens to my fixed rate now? Nothing. Because fixed rates are not directly tied to the Bank of Canada. Usually they react a little faster, sort of. The fixed rate depends on the bond rate. Bond rates tend to anticipate what the Bank of Canada is going to do. If you see that bond rates are going down and fixed rates are going down, you can assume that most likely the variable rate will also go down. But there is no direct connection. So, as of today, before this recent decrease, you could say that the variable and fixed rates were at about the same level. They hovered around 4%, just a bit below 4%. Of course, it depends on the situation. If you're refinancing, it could be higher, like 4.1, 4.2, and so on. If it's a purchase, depending on the down payment, the rate can even be below 4%. But now, thanks to this decrease, the variable rate has definitely become more attractive than the fixed rate. And in general, if you look at the history of variable rates, they have always been lower than fixed rates. Recently, the situation changed a bit because there was an unusual scenario. But in standard situations, you can always assume that the variable rate will be lower than the fixed rate on the day the deal closes. Because banks, on the one hand, are interested in offering you a variable rate since they're not committing to anything. Yes, they earn a little less because your rate is lower. But if the rate goes the other way, the bank doesn't lose anything. If the banks give you a fixed rate and the rates go down, then in this situation, the bank doesn't lose anything. But if the rate goes up, then the banks start to lose. That's why, on the one hand, we're returning to the normal situation where the variable rate is lower than the fixed rate. If you decide to go with a variable rate, you should of course be a bit cautious. Why? Because you need to be something of an expert. You have to keep track of what's happening in the market. You need to pay attention to what's going on with inflation. Because for the Bank of Canada, inflation is the most important factor. If inflation goes up, you can expect that the Bank of Canada's interest rate will also start to rise. Although there are already serious discussions that the Bank of Canada's target of keeping inflation around 2 or 2.2% will likely be raised and will be hovering around 3%. Because that's exactly what's happening in America. For them, 2% used to be considered normal inflation, but now 3% is seen as normal inflation. Now let's talk about the most important point. What's the difference between a variable rate and a fixed rate? I'm not talking about the fact that everyone knows a fixed rate doesn't change for 5 years, 3 years, depending on the term you choose. A variable rate changes every time the Bank of Canada changes its rate. But here's a question that comes up. Can I switch from a variable rate to a fixed rate at any time without it costing me anything? Yes. The answer is absolutely. You can switch from a variable rate to a fixed rate at any time. The only question is, what will that fixed rate be? For example, if today the fixed rate is 3.5%, but you decide to switch in a year, and in a year the rate is 4.5%, you can expect to get 4.5%. That's why it's very important to keep an eye on the market and what's happening. And the easiest way to do that is just to follow my YouTube channel. If the time comes, well, if you are our clients, you will receive this information from us anyway, either by email or a phone call, letting you know that it's time to switch from a variable to a fixed rate. But if you're not my clients, which of course I think isn't quite right, and I hope you'll become our clients, then you need to follow me on social media to know when it would be a good idea to make this switch. If you have a fixed rate, switching to a variable rate is possible, but it will involve penalties. When switching from a variable to a fixed rate, there are no penalties, but you can only do this at the bank where you currently have your mortgage. You can't say, okay, I have a variable rate at RBC right now, and I want to switch to a fixed rate, so I'll do it at another bank. That's not possible. You have to do it at the same bank where you currently have your variable rate. And of course, the bank will take advantage of this a little because they know perfectly well that to get a better rate, you'd need to switch to another bank. But that's still a minor thing. If you lose a little on the interest rate, like 0.1 or 0.2, it's not a big deal. It's much more important to pay attention to the fact that if you want to switch from a fixed to a variable rate, there will be penalties. And the difference in penalties is huge depending on the bank. You know, honestly, I'm already tired of talking about this topic. I keep trying to explain to people that if you take a fixed rate at RBC, TD, Scotiabank, or CIBC and later want to switch to a variable rate or do something better, it's impossible because the penalties there are astronomical. And yet I still constantly get calls from clients who say, look, I have a rate of 4.5% there. Now the rates are better. Can I switch? But the first thing I ask is, where are you? I'm at RBC, I'm at CIBC, I'm at TD. Well, there's nothing you can do because the penalties there are so high, it's impossible to get out. That's why, I often hear, well, my friends advise me or my realtor told me to go to RBC or TD or Scotiabank. Well then, maybe you should call that friend or the realtor who gave you that advice and maybe they'll pay the penalty for you. But in the end, I would really like to point out one important thing. If you're taking a variable rate, you should choose a bank right away that will have low penalties in the future if you decide to switch from a fixed to a variable rate. Why? Because you can only make the switch at the bank where you currently have your variable rate. If you took it out at RBC, TD, Scotiabank, or CIBC and you decide to switch to a fixed rate, you can only do so at these banks. And from that moment, you're caught in this trap. You won't be able to leave this bank because the penalty for breaking this agreement is very high. We call all clients for whom it makes sense to break the deal and switch, say, from bank A to bank B. Because, for example, you might lose $3,000, but you'll gain $25,000 over the remaining 3 or 4 years you have left. But if your mortgage is with RBC, TD, Scotiabank, CIBC, and so on, then you'll save $20,000 but lose $25,000. There's no logic in that. That's why you need to pay attention to this factor. Call us and we'll make sure you get the best variable rate today. But what's much more important is that it will be a bank with low penalties. And when it becomes advantageous, we'll let you know that it's time to switch to a fixed rate. If it ever happens that the rate drops so much that it makes sense for you to break your fixed rate and get a better fixed rate at another bank or even at the same bank, we'll let you know about that too. So the most profitable and correct option is to contact us. We'll help you get your first mortgage done right. And thanks to that, of course, we'll keep an eye on the market and make sure that it's not the bank making money off you, but you making money off the bank. Who do I currently recommend a floating interest rate to? I believe that anyone who is already established, has a good, reliable job, there's no risk, let's say, from the outside that they might lose their job. Although right now it's very difficult in places like Toronto and Vancouver, there are huge economic problems there and people are losing their jobs. Right now, it's very advantageous to buy there. If, for example, you were planning to someday buy an apartment specifically in the GTA, in the downtown area, prices have dropped significantly there now. But of course, they won't stay low forever, because construction companies have simply stopped building homes. This means it's only a matter of time before buyers return, but there won't be any sellers. It's just that right now, many investors want to get out of the business. Many people who once bought a pre-construction apartment, which might be completed in 5 or 6 years, were planning to sell it for a profit. All of that isn't working out now because prices have dropped. So at the moment, if your job situation is stable and secure, buying in these areas might not be such a bad idea. But here I recommend consulting your realtor, someone who understands and knows the market, because in Canada, there is no single Canadian real estate market. In Canada, there are only regional real estate markets, so you always need to look at the region where you live and base your decisions on that. But if you're buying your first home, well, I don't know, in that case, maybe it wouldn't hurt to lock in your interest rate for 5 years and do it with a bank that has a low penalty. And then you'll know for sure that you don't have to worry about falling into that trap. But if you're fine with your nerves, I don't see anything wrong with a variable rate. I expect that it will continue to go down. I think we'll see at least another 0.25% drop, maybe even 0.5%, which is very good for people with a variable rate. But be careful. Pay attention to what's happening. Keep an eye on inflation so you don't end up in the same trap as those who once took out a variable rate at 1%, only to see it jump to 5% in a short time. I hope it never comes to that, but no one knows for sure. So my advice is call us and we'll explain everything to you. And we'll explain the situation based on your specific circumstances. Not just in general terms, but specifically as it relates to you. I have a lot of employees working for me. We handle insurance, we handle investments, we handle mortgages, and we speak your language. I've been in the business for over 22 years. I'm among the top 75 brokers in Canada. There are 30,000 of us, so you're in good hands. That's why I recommend, give us a call. We'll get you pre-approved, get you prepared, set your limits, and then you can confidently call your realtor and let them search for a home for you. And we'll take care of your financial well-being. That's all for now. I wish you all a great mood, God's blessings, and good health. Until next time in the virtual world, this was Victor Scheffer with you.
Thank you for watching this video. We hope you found it useful. We'd be glad if you share it with your friends and acquaintances.
Follow us on Facebook at VSS Financial Group and on YouTube at VSS Solutions.
If you are interested in getting a mortgage or need insurance, fill out the form on our website, vsssolutions.ca.
Contact us by phone at 1-877-282-0904 or email us at safavsolutions.ca for more information.
Enjoy your wonderful life today, and rest assured that we will work diligently to create a truly successful and prosperous tomorrow for you.